just now, and then if Frankie rejoins us, we can just edit to suit. Right, so last week we spent a bit of time chatting about working safely with young people and looking at how we manage activities safely and the steps that we can take before, during, and after to ensure that our processes are safe, and that we've got an appropriate balance between the benefit that we think will accrue to the young people from doing activity and the risks that are inherent in that activity. And that video, if anybody wants to kind of look back over it, that video is up online now, and we'll put the links to it on, I think, probably on the knowledge base on the workplace. So this week we are going to move on, and I just want to give you a very quick review of some of the issues around safeguarding, which is the kind of catch-all term now for child protection. Safeguarding nowadays, a few years back, the child protection legislation in Scotland was extended to encompass what are termed vulnerable adults. And people now tend to refer to this area as safeguarding rather than child protection, because it's not limited purely to children anymore. Obviously, at the moment, our work is concerned mainly or almost entirely with children. And so we don't actually have a separate policy on working with vulnerable adults, because it's not something that we do. And our PVG checks are not done with that in mind either. We have to kind of tick as to whether we're doing it for children or vulnerable adults. So it's worth being aware that this won't apply if you've had your PVG check done somewhere else, and then we've just done a scheme record update. But if you joined the PVG scheme through CIMI, if the form you did for us was the first time you've done that, then your PVG at the moment, you're only registered for work with a qualifying work with children and young people and not vulnerable adults. It's not difficult to get it extended, but it's just so that you're aware of that. So what are we talking about when we talk about safeguarding? We are talking about working in such a way as to maybe. Excellent. This will be cut out. There we go. I'll have to click on it because it's not working with the keyboard. So we're talking about keeping participants safe from various types of harm. The one that perhaps comes up most often in conversation is sexual abuse. But safeguarding also incorporates physical harm. It incorporates emotional or psychological harm. And there's a sort of catch-all term, which is called an organic failure to thrive. And the first three, or certainly the first two, are probably, for the most part, fairly straightforward to understand what they involve. Sexual abuse is talking about inappropriate sexual behavior, conversations, physical contact, that sort of thing between an adult and a young person. It's worth bearing in mind that for the purposes of safeguarding, the distinction comes at 16. So we have had in the past one or two issues where we've had a sort of what we would term young adults working with us, young people between the ages of 16 and 18, who in one case in particular, somebody was volunteering with us as a 17-year-old and got into what was as far as we could tell, a consensual relationship with a 14-year-old. And we felt, after some discussion, we felt that we needed to ask them we couldn't let them continue volunteering, because it was just an inappropriate relationship with them as a volunteer at CIMI and the young person as a participant. That was quite a sort of complex situation. I mention it only to illustrate that, because of the type of work that we do, where we work with young people who are above the age of 16 and obviously work with young adults who are above the age of 18, that it can sometimes set up issues where, as an organization, we have to sort of step in if relationships cross those statutory boundaries, if you like, in order to sort of basically maintain our safeguarding credibility. We're also talking about keeping participants safe from physical harm. We have, again, for the most part, that would be dealing with issues of a physical assault on a child by a parent or some other adult or someone older. But it can also be an act of omission, if you like, rather than an act of commission. So it can be that a child is suffering physical harm because of steps that an adult isn't taking, rather than physically harming them by hitting them or beating them or something like that. So physical harm would also incorporate that. Emotional and psychological harm, I guess that's where we start to get into what, for us, trying to make judgments about what constitutes emotional or psychological harm can sometimes start to be a little bit more of a grey area when you hear children being spoken to in a certain way, and it seems to be a consistent pattern. And it just starts to feel very wrong for you, and we'll discuss what to do in those situations later on. But again, that's where someone will usually be a verbal thing, or actions or not actions. There's no marks on the child, but the actions, the speech, the attitude of an adult around them is having a negative psychological or emotional impact on the child. And the inorganic failure to thrive one is, in some respects, probably the hardest one to manage. That deals with a sort of general neglect. From a social work point of view, it's perhaps there are markers of, for example, of child development in physical growth, in speech, in social skills, and so on, that within certain bands you would expect a child to attain. And so if a child is at school, for example, or at CIMI, but normally it's the sort of thing that would be picked up on at school because of the frequency with which they see young people. And it's just, if a child is starting to really drop back behind his or her peers, in terms of their physical development or their emotional development or their social skills development, and just general appearance, perhaps, of neglect, not being well dressed, not being clean, then the school would start to take steps to flag that up and note concerns, and eventually flag it to social work and hopefully get some kind of intervention. It can be difficult. I mean, if you read the the formal description of an inorganic failure to thrive, I would say actually that a lot of children who live in, you know, disadvantaged areas could, strictly speaking, be said to be failing to thrive. Often not because of the activity of their parents. Their parents are doing a good, you know, as good a job as they possibly can in difficult circumstances, but because of the environment that's created by wider social policy initiatives and so on, economic priorities, that actually there's a fair proportion of children in the UK who are not meeting the kind of development bands for thriving because of that. But that's perhaps a wider debate for another day. So just bringing it right back to Simi, what do we do in terms of safeguarding? Well, there are two things that we do. One is that we work in ways that are safe. So we work on with patterns of working, with standards of behavior and so on, that try to minimize the chance of young people being harmed in any way, whether it's sexually, physically, emotionally, or so on. The key rule, I tried to kind of distill it down into, if you like, one phrase, and I had a toss-up between don't be a dick and treat young people with respect, and I went with treat young people with respect. A lot of the time when we've had to, and it's not something that happens very often, but on the occasions when I have had to talk to people within Simi to address their behavior as volunteers, you know, with respect to how they're treating young people, it's often boils down to this lack of respect. And it seems a strange thing at times that somebody would come and work with an organization that's entirely focused on the development of young people, and not treat young people with respect. But people pitch up in youth work for all sorts of weird and wonderful reasons, and it doesn't always happen. So I think the key here for us is to, you know, if in doubt, what is the respectful thing to do? And when I was thinking about examples, you know, one of the trickier things that we sometimes do is we do a lot of climbing, and particularly with the younger children, that often means helping them with putting on climbing harnesses. The leg loops and the waist loops can be quite hard to manipulate if you've got small hands and you're not as kind of, you know, you don't have the same dexterity. And the sort of generic climbing harnesses that we use are actually sometimes quite stiff. So you'll often get a child coming to you going, can you help me with a climbing harness? And it's one of those things that you know, it's right, if you like, in around the area of the child that you really don't want to have to be sort of footering with, because you've got a waist belt and two leg loops, you know. So I always encourage people who are helping me with the climbing to take that basic attitude of respect. Don't dive in and just grab a harness and start footering with it. Even though they're children, you know, they have a right to decide who's going to be near them physically. So ask, do you want a hand with the harness? Can I help you with that? Can I give you a bit of advice? Encouraging them to do it themselves kind of eliminates that risk. I realized very quickly that, you know, with a small child, you've got to kind of kneel down to help them with a harness. And again, rather than kneeling directly in front of them, where you're basically now at sort of crotch height, I just go to the side and I take a step back. So my arms are at fuller extension. I'm trying to kind of, you know, be as unintrusive as possible when you kind of help. So things like that. I remember when the child protection legislation was first formalised, and I at that time I worked in a church, and one or two of the older folk in the church who had been involved in Sunday school and things like that got really upset because they were sort of saying, "Oh, does that mean I can't hug a child?" and all the rest of it. And it ended up being a slightly bizarre conversation, because we had this conversation about respect, and I was saying, well, you don't have any, even though you are adults, you don't have any right to assume that you can just go and hug a child. You know, if a child is upset, there are various ways that you can deal with it. But this kind of assumption that you can just kind of step into a child's personal space and stick your hands on them because you think it's appropriate, just seems to me lacking in respect.
You know, it makes me think about when I was at the kids camp, and like if everybody's having fun and they're like, "Oh my God, that's amazing, you're the best," and they run up and give you a cuddle.
Yeah.
Like you're not supposed to just grab the child and throw them away. Like no, but it was like you can give if a young person wants to give you a cuddle, then you make sure that you kind of turn to your side.
Yeah.
And it's like this kind of awkward, weird side cuddle. But
absolutely.
But they're still quite happy, and you feel like you're still giving them like the attention that they're looking for, and it's done. That's it. So that, I think that's a good thing to remember as well, like a wee sidey hug.
Yeah, absolutely. I am master of the side hug, and you can get quite adept at it, where you can pivot instantly to get side on to the child as they sort of launch into you. It's quite funny. But yeah, I mean, if Katrina was here, she ran down the stairs, she would tell you I give the best hugs in the world, apparently. But I would never dream of, even if I had a child who was weeping their eyes out, I would never dream of just sort of wading in and giving them a hug. Because it just, for me, it would be breaking that rule about treating children with respect and respecting their sort of physical space and their right to decide who is near them and who isn't. And the second part of this is taking action when harm is suspected or revealed. We have been pretty fortunate, I guess, in CIMI in that over the years, we haven't had to deal with many situations. The ones that we have, though, have rarely been that straightforward, in the sense of, a child just coming and saying this bad thing has happened to me, and then it's a case of notifying the appropriate authorities and moving that concern on and dealing with it from there. They've often been, you get an inkling that something is not quite right, and a child maybe hints at something, and you have to kind of follow that up. And there's sometimes an instinct to, or sometimes there's a reluctance amongst people, I've found, to because it's a ghastly thing to have to deal with, in one respect, where you're running a session and everything is happy and it's going really well and productive, and then a child comes and talks to you about something, or just says something as an aside which builds on something else, and all of a sudden you're like, I've got, there's something not quite right here. And so that's why I wrote this second part, which is be brave. There have been too many cases in the past where adults have opted to just not believe a child, or make light of things that a child has said, or done any number of things to basically put them, to be in denial about what they're being confronted with. And as a result, instead of being able to sort of start the process of intervening on behalf of that child to improve their welfare, they've basically left them in that situation. And that's something we want to avoid at all costs. So that's really our second one, is be brave, and don't kind of go into denial if you're being told something, often very subtly or very discreetly. My experience has been it comes as hints and suggestions, and it would be very easy just to kind of overlook it or make light of it, and it's important that we don't.
I would add that sometimes it comes as questions about your own life, and I was reflecting on this aspect when we were talking about what you do when young people ask you direct and awkward questions. And I said sometimes that can include about your sex life. And what I didn't say at the time, but I'll say now, is that the age of the child actually doesn't even matter about the age of the child, but also just the fact that they're asking those questions might be worth exploring. Kind of, that's why it's so important to say, why is that of interest to you, or what's that about, rather than saying, I don't want to talk about my life, thank you very much, and shutting the conversation down. Because if you've got a 10-year-old asking about your sex life, should we be exploring that a little bit more, and why?
So weird that sometimes you can just pick up on these things, like it is just a gut instinct, and like you're saying, be brave, and it's like definitely if you feel like there's just something that's not right, you need to chase it up and tell somebody. Because you're I mean, I might be being a bit dramatic, but you could potentially be a lifeline. You are a lifeline. You're that person can come and talk to, and that's your job to do something about
it. There's a case, a very recent case, of a fairly wide, quite well, no, not quite a serious case. There was a very serious case quite recently where I'm trying to feel my way forward through this one. We had some concerns, and we asked some questions, and were told at the time that actually those concerns were shared by the sort of statutory bodies and were being followed up. And so because that was the response, youth work organizations don't have any formal part to play in the investigative process. So once in a sense you've passed on the concern, you're dependent on social services and the police following it up. And we'd done that a couple of years ago, and subsequently there was quite a significant intervention. But we discovered that it basically had been triggered by a retired social worker and a retired policeman, who neither of them were satisfied with the way that the initial investigation had gone, and so basically did this within their own remits. They were brave about it, and they pushed the door and got people to investigate it further, and it ended up that action was taken, and somebody's actually intervened on the children's behalf. But if they hadn't done that, if they'd just gone, oh well, that investigation was, we passed it on and that was it, then those kids could still be stuck in that situation now. So it's important that we don't investigate. We in a sense, we observe, we note down things, we pass them on to the relevant authorities, but I'm also pretty adamant that we don't then just let things drop if that's the case, and we sort of keep an eye on what has happened and ask questions of the relevant folks about what's sort of going on there. And if there is an active case, you won't get a lot of information, and that's entirely appropriate. But it's fairly easy sometimes to pick up the difference between something that's an active case, and so it's not appropriate for you to be told anymore, or something where somebody's just, you know, filed it at the back of the filing cabinet and it's not being followed up appropriately. That happens less and less nowadays, but the reality is that social work in particular are overloaded. They have far more work than they have resources to deal with. And so it's almost inevitable at some stage that, you know, individual cases cannot receive the attention that they would otherwise merit, just because social work don't have the resources to do it. So, so in terms of sort of jumping back slightly, in terms of working in ways that are safe, treating with young people with respect, as an adult, use the power that you have responsibly. As youth workers, we have a lot of power. We decide the program. We can control things to quite a high extent. I'm a big fan of giving young people as much control as is safe around activities, or as is productive around activities. For a variety of reasons, not least of which is that I think, again, it encourages us as a working practice to treat young people with respect. If they're being given the opportunity to contribute to the programme, to help with the running, to feedback about the activities that we're doing or the general demeanour of the organisation. And actually that includes that all of those are probably easier than the last one, which is sometimes giving feedback on the conduct or attitude of staff. There's a lot of organisations, a lot of youth workers who really don't like getting feedback from kids that says, you know, that wasn't a good session, or I really don't like your attitude, or, you know, you're a bit cheeky. But we need to be open to hearing that and having that correct our attitude towards young people. It's sometimes not easy. I've had young people challenge me a couple of times over the years. Sometimes I've agreed with them, sometimes I haven't, but I always take it seriously. And I would take it seriously if one of the young people came and said to me, you know, one of your staff is, or one of your team is sort of being rude to me or acting inappropriately. So use the power you have responsibly. Use control and moderation. You know, again, that a lot of the time that's voice, what have you. If you don't need to shout at the kids, don't shout at them. Is there another way to control the group? We don't see her so much now because she's shielding, but Jeanne McIntyre, who was one of our trustees, who was a very experienced primary school teacher, was very good and actually came and did a few sessions with us, where I think we all learned something about the way that she interacted and managed some of the more sort of, you know, rumbustious children in the group. And she was actually very good at exercising control in a very kind of reasonable and constructive way. And respect to children's personhood. I've said that, I've talked about the climbing harnesses and stuff like that. Sometimes there is a reason. I can't remember when it was, last year sometime, one of the kids took the hump with me for a moment because we were at a road and I suddenly grabbed them by their rucksack and hauled them back. But they were actually so busy chatting with their chum next to them, that they were actually just about to step off the curb, and there was a bus coming into the bus stop, so it had actually come into the lane. And if I hadn't done it, they would have stepped out in front of the bus, basically. And there was this, you could sort of see it for the moment of outrage that you just grabbed me and yanked me off the pavement, followed by, oh crap, that was a big bus with a lot of momentum coming to sort of slam into you. So there are occasions when, you know, you might need to kind of physically go, no, don't do that, because there's an immediate severe risk to a young person climbing or something like that. But generally speaking, youth work is a hands-off activity, and we're interacting with the young people in a respectful way. We're really looking to transfer power from ourselves to them at an appropriate rate, transferring control from ourselves to them at an appropriate rate.
Just to pick up on the example of Jeanne, one of the things she was very good at, which we're not, and it works very well with the young people, is speaking when the young people have done something right and praising them for that behavior.
Yeah.
What we tend to do, and I think it's potentially a kind of natural characteristic of British people, we're not always the most positive, like you know, or good, or it doesn't necessarily come naturally to compliment people constantly, or to say, well done, that was good work, or you did that, or did that. So what we do is we end up in a situation where the only time we really directly speak to a young person is if they've done something wrong, or if we need to stop them doing something. And actually Jeanne came from completely the opposite perspective. So she attempted to almost, I mean, she very rarely needed to say anything to correct a child's behavior, because she was so busy praising the good stuff that they wanted to please. They wanted more of that praise, so they were busy doing that, and that was the technique used.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Molly. There is I think, I suppose, just kind of reinforcing that, or reinforcing through repetition. There is a kind of approach to youth work that is quite predominant, that sort of tends to have somebody stand in the middle of a room and shout. And it's actually not that effective. It's one of the reasons why I much prefer working in small groups, because it's much easier to work in the way that Molly's describing there than it is with 30 people in the middle of a room. You can do, the bigger the group, I think, even with a sort of well socialized group, the bigger the group, the more you veer from doing sort of constructive developmental work and more towards crowd control. So there's a place for it. I mean, you know, we've all probably been in situations as children or young people where we've been in a big group playing games, and it's been good fun and we've thoroughly enjoyed it. So there's definitely a place for that within developmental activities for young people. But I think a lot of the nitty-gritty of development work that we do is best done in small groups. And often the more you know, young people who are coming from very chaotic situations, whose lives are very chaotic, whose behavior patterns are chaotic, you usually need very small group, or sometimes even one-to-one work to be able to get the sort of dynamic going that Molly's describing there, where predominantly what you're saying is positive, constructive, affirming, and you're able to kind of minimize the need to sort of challenge and basically shout. It's also worth bearing in mind that for a lot of children, that's actually how they get, or sorry, I shouldn't say a lot of children. There will be children in any group for whom interaction with adults is largely about getting shouted at when they do something wrong. And that's often the you know, that's that for some kids, that's pretty much the only interaction that they get with adults. And so doing what Molly describes, where you're working with them one-to-one even, and actually giving them positive affirmation for things that they're doing well, is a completely new experience for them. It can sound a bit bizarre to say it, but that's the reality for some kids. That is a new thing, and it takes them a bit of time to cope. But I've yet to find a child who doesn't seem to respond eventually to getting that kind of positive affirmation, because I think it speaks to something in our psyche about who we are as people. That shouting and negative behavior just will never ever touch. So use power responsibly, control in moderation, and respect children's personhood. We have a card actually needs rewritten because we've updated some of this. But there's a little sort of card that we hand out to, or have handed out, to definitely make it past tense rather than present continuous. We do not currently hand it out, we used to. Just a sort of a little checklist of guidance, and this basically is the chatting through the treat young people with respect. The sort of thing that might constitute physical, psychological, sexual, or neglecting behavior, abuse, and that basic statement that harm detracts from the dignity of their person, their innate value as an individual, their right to respect, and their self-worth. And all these are all things that we are trying to nurture as youth workers, both in the young people that we work with, but also in the team. So none of you sort of qualify as vulnerable individuals when you're working at CIMI. We still want to ensure that this is your experience working with us, that we nurture your value as an individual, your right to respect, and your self-worth. If that's not happening for you as a person at CIMI, then we'd want to work out why that's not happening and take steps to do it. I can't believe that I've left the word individual in there. That should be changed for person. Ugh. 30 years of studying philosophy and I still missed out losing an individual. Right, what to do when harm is suspected or revealed. The 4 R's of safeguarding. Recognition, reporting, recording, and referral. I mentioned before, it's important to reiterate, we're not an investigative agency. It is important, there's more detail in our safeguarding handbook and in the little card, but we have to be very careful if any kind of abuse is disclosed or alluded to, not to ask searching questions that can compromise any future prosecution. So it's much better just to ask open-ended questions that allow a child an opportunity to tell you what they want to tell you, without trying to sort of, without accidentally asking what would be termed a leading question that sort of encourages a certain answer. So the first step is recognition. Get to know what constitutes abuse in each of the areas. And if you're not sure, there is absolutely no harm in coming to talk to myself or Molly or Katrina. Kat has, although she's not around doing face-to-face work as much, Kat has in the past dealt with several of our safeguarding issues. You often find that residentials are a time when you take a child out of a situation and they have a bit of space to be somewhere different. They start to build up a relationship with you. And that often we found has become the context where they've then started to talk about things that have happened or are happening to them that they haven't talked about before. And we're then able to help them put an end to that. But learning to sort of recognize what constitutes abuse is vital, so that you sort of develop a sense of, yeah, that doesn't sound right, that's off, that language is off, that so on. Reporting. For you guys, it's a fairly straightforward process. We have a child protection coordinator at CIMI, who is currently me, who will, so if you have any concerns, you just come and you basically report them back to me, and it's my responsibility to then work out what to do next. If we have a system where if there's a concern raised about me, then we have a designated member of the board who you can report to directly. And if we also have an external safeguarding advisor who has a dual function, one of which is that somebody more experienced in this than me, who I can go and talk to and get advice about how best to sort of action any concerns that we have. But they also serve a second purpose, which is if you raise a concern, and I guess it would be particularly if you raise a concern that something that is going on within CIMI, and you feel that it has not been dealt with appropriately or taken seriously, then John's number is available on that card, and it's available in our safeguarding handbook, and you are at liberty to phone John and raise that concern with him directly. So that is part of our safeguarding policy, that we have an external contact for any of our team to get in touch with if they feel that there's a situation that is not being dealt with appropriately or can't be dealt with appropriately. If it's a concern about me or Katrina or something like that, then you have that external point of contact to go and talk to. So that would be the reporting. What will happen in practice is if you come and relay a concern to me, I will ask you to make some notes. We have a little form, a sort of safeguarding form, and I'll just ask you to write down as soon after you've made you've raised the concern with me, to write down the kind of key facts that you've revealed to me, so that we have a record of that. Because aside from anything else, if we feel that at this point we don't have enough to act on, we'll want a written record of that, so that, for example, if Maxine comes and talks to me about a situation, and then a month from now Stephanie comes and talks to me about a different situation with the same child, we now have two issues being raised there, and we're think right, there's a pattern starting to emerge. We perhaps need to take this further. So it's important that we keep that written record. And the third one will be referral. Again, that is a relatively straightforward process. Once we decide we've got to a point where we need to make a referral, there's a sort of social work hotline that we will phone and relay our concerns to, and they will then take the matter further. So it's basically down to talking to the duty social worker on their child protection line. We don't investigate at all. So at the point at which we make a referral, we then simply become a witness if necessary. And it's important that we keep our records secure long term. We've had only one, but we've had one situation where a young person disclosed abuse to us as a teenager, and then much later, as an adult, decided to pursue a prosecution of a relative who had abused her, and as part of that prosecution, Kat was required to go and just confirm the record that she had kept at the time, and that must have been about 8 or 10 years after the event. So it's important that we keep a thorough record of what's been told to us and what actions we've taken, and any other concerns that we might have. So, because partly it's a record for us if we are then asked about it at some point further down the line. And it can be quite some time after the event when that sort of thing takes place.
Sorry, can I just ask, what constitutes a probing question? Like, what is, if someone said something that you thought was an indication of something inappropriate, are you supposed to say, is something happening that you're uncomfortable? Like, do you directly ask a question, or is that a probing question?
Well, is something happening is an open question, because it's as easy to answer no as it is to answer yes. If somebody comes and says, I'm now struggling to think of one. If you can think of one, Molly, do feel free to jump in.
Well, I was going to say, I've been taught an open question is one that cannot be answered yes or no to.
Yeah.
That's the retail version.
Yes. So so I think the difference might be, is there something you want to, or if I'm now trying to think yes or no, there's I'm here if you want to talk about something.
Yeah.
Is an opportunity for that young person to talk. The opposite being kind of, is one of your parents doing something to you? Which one? How long has it been happening for? All of that kind of stuff. We're here we're here in all instances, not just in cases of abuse or sexual or physical or any other types of abuse, but in all instances we're here to offer a space for the young people to speak freely about what they want and what they can't. And I think it becomes probing at the point when you're driving the conversation, not the young person.
Okay. Yeah, but it's okay to give them an opportunity to elaborate on something that you found to be suspicious.
It's okay to make sure that make the young person aware that you're there if they want to talk.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
That's also a good game, the yes or no game. And you can ask questions and be like, so is blue your favourite colour? And you can't say yes or no, so you have to come up with a different answer. That's actually quite a good game. This is more of a serious context though, so apologies.
No, it's okay. Well, I was going to suggest as a kind of sort of less serious example of, an open question might be, Emma, do you drink alcohol? So within a context of an adult conversation, you might feel quite relaxed about saying yes or no, or not very often, or whatever. If I say, how often do you get drunk? Then all of a sudden that's a very crude leading question, because it's kind of really, it's difficult for you to answer at anything other than by the starting point being, yes, I get drunk. It's just a question of how often it happens. But the much more subtle one, I think, when you're talking about these kinds of scenarios, and it's probably just a general it's a general reflection, and again, I'm conscious that Molly is much better versed in the whole field of a active listening than I am. But you can sort of, you can find yourself asking a question that kind of very unintentionally, but invites the person to continue to kind of embellish the situation, because they've kind of started a conversation where you're now focused on them and you're listening to them, and and so you ask a question, and it's almost like, well, it gets probing, because you're sort of saying, well, tell me more so that we can continue this, I hesitate to say therapeutic conversation, because that's really the remit of a trained counselor, but that in effect that's almost what you're doing, and it's unintentionally kind of manipulating the situation, so they maybe feel safe with you, they feel like you care about them, you're taking them seriously, and they give you the answers they think you're searching for in order to continue that situation where they feel cared about and what have you. So it can be quite tricky.
I can, if people are interested in, I have done a short training session on active listening with the interns in the past. If people want to, I could, this was going to be the last of the 4 weeks of training, but I'd be happy to do, it wouldn't be more than 45 minutes really. I'd be happy to do that next week if people are interested.
I think we should do that.
Yeah, I'd like to do that.
Yeah. So it's worth saying.
I'm really sorry though, but I have to go now after that saying that.
Just
sorry.
It's okay. Just before you go, Emma, very, very quickly. So this is intended only just to be an introduction to the subject. What we're going to do next is give everybody the opportunity to undertake the Sports Scotland, or the Children First and Sports Scotland, a safeguarding and sport course, which is online. You can do, it's about an evening's sit down and work through it. Very good course, and that will go into some of these questions in a bit more detail. So I'm not there. That's a much better training course, much thorough training course than this, which is really just intended as a bit of a brief introduction to the subject. So thanks, Emma.
Sorry.
Bye, Emma.
No, it's okay.
Bye.
Apologize. Right. Anybody else got any other questions about this?
I've seen Molly do that before. Like, you probably don't even know you're doing it, Molly, but like the young people were talking about something, and I think it was like when there was the whole pedo patrol thing, and other than probing questions, it was like, what makes you think that? What makes you say that? Like that kind of, like letting them explain where they're getting their information from, and then Molly have an opportunity to say, I think the best thing to do is not get involved, because if you, when you do get involved in things like this, it actually jeopardizes somebody getting in trouble. It jeopardizes the police investigation and stuff, and they didn't know that. And it's like, the more that you go out and do these things and start calling people's names and stuff like that, that can jeopardize actually somebody getting into trouble for this. And they're like, all right. But it was just that kind of, what makes you say that? Where did you get that from?
That's a relief. Could have said anything there.
Yeah, we were all like, what has Molly done? Yeah.
Many things.
Yeah.
You're lucky.
The recent events in Townhead, from what I believe, had a very tragic outcome, and for one person, where they were falsely accused by the ferret, is it, or the digger, whatever it was, and they actually took their own life, I believe. So pretty ghastly, and apparently it was a case of mistaken identity.
That's it. But that will always stay with you. That will stay with you forever. It won't even be that your name's cleared. It'll be like, I remember that guy. We all thought he was a pedo. I remember that guy got branded with this name. He kind of just walked down the street as whoever he is. It's like, I remember when. And it's awful. It's absolutely awful.
Yeah. And there are...
I obviously understand the anger behind it, but you need to leave it up to the police. You need to choose your battles, because you can make it 10 times worse.
Yeah, but difficult if you're in the middle of that situation and angry about things that are going on. But you're right.
Definitely.
Right. So just to kind of finish off, I'm not going to read through all this, but this is basically the rest of the card that we hand out. And it's basically just walking through this. The only thing that's missing at the moment is that, as I say, Jeanne recently, because her husband was unwell, stepped down as a trustee. So we need to get a replacement for Jeanne as the safeguarding trustee. So for the time being, if there were any concerns that you had, that you felt would be inappropriate to communicate to me, then you can communicate directly with John on the telephone number, and that's in the safeguarding handbook as well, which is on... It is currently buried somewhere on Molly and I's desk underneath a pile of crap. But the safeguarding handbook is in the semi-admin folder under semi-documentation, and it should be available for anyone to open up as a read-only document and have a look at, or you can go and surf through the accumulated crap from a year's lockdown on the desk and try and find it there. And just that wee reminder again of some of the sort of basic, the basics of what we're talking about in terms of harm or abuse. And just to reiterate that third box there, if it looks, sounds or feels wrong, then it probably is wrong. Trust your gut feeling. It's only the starting point. Don't jump to conclusions about the outcome. So, bearing in mind the caveat that we said about the leading questions, if you have a gut instinct that something about a child's situation is just not right, there's absolutely no harm in sharing that concern, at least internally with us, and so that we can start to note it down and start to keep an eye on the situation. Yeah, you're never going to be, certainly not under my watch, you're never going to be called out for sharing a concern with me, even if I don't necessarily think we need to action it at the moment. If you share the concern, we'll take it seriously, we'll note it down, and it will be there for us to refer to if it starts to become a continuing pattern that starts to concern us much more. So please, if you have concerns, share them, and let's ensure that we are acting for the welfare of the young people that we work with. That said, always like to finish these things just with an observation that over the years we have dealt with or had to deal with probably only about 5 or 6 incidents. That's in about 20 odd years of working as a youth worker. Other people in different situations will have had more, but it is thankfully relatively rare that we have to deal with these scenarios. which can make it difficult because it's not something we're used to dealing with. But we just need to balance out the conversation about this with the kind of reminder that the overwhelming majority of the work that we do with young people is about nurturing their development and helping them develop towards a sort of thriving adult life. Okay, I'm going to stop there. Any questions?
You're so good at PowerPoints.
Thank
That's not
you.
a question.
One question I have is about this training that you're offering.
Yeah.
What is it like?
The online safeguarding course. Yeah, so it's been put together by Sport Scotland, which is sort of national body for sporty things in Scotland, hence the name Sport Scotland, and an organisation called Children First, who used to be Save the Children, something like that. I can't remember what it used to be called, but big sort of child welfare voluntary organisation in the UK, who nowadays specialise in child protection training and support for vulnerable young people. So they've put together a course. It's available online. The way it works is that we book 10 tokens for the training course. We give you each a token, which you can then, you go onto their website, you create an account, you log in, enter the token, it gives you access to the training. A token's just a sort of code, a key code, if you like. You enter that in, you take the training. It took me, I think, about 2 hours, maybe sitting online. It's a mix of working through slides that they've got and a bit of narrative, and then they do little, I think there's like little multiple choice tests at the end of it. And there's about 3 or 4 sections to it. So you could do it over 3 or 4 nights, but I just kind of battered through it in an evening. I will be perfectly honest, to put up my hand, I did it because it was a requirement for one of my outdoor ed qualifications. I went into it thinking it was just going to be a bit of a box ticking exercise, and actually found it really useful. It raised, because it's focused on safeguarding in sport and sport coaching, it applies to a lot of the stuff that we do. And it asks lots of really thought-provoking questions, I found, about how we, all sorts of subtle things. I mean, you might have seen some of the recent news reports about, for example, Gymnastics UK and some of the problems they've had there with participants, young participants now coming back and raising issues where looking back on their treatment in Gymnastics UK, they're now feeling that it was abusive because of the way that they were treated with respect to diet and body shape and training and so on. The course covers a lot of these things about how we fit what we do with young people and helping them develop, whether it's in sports or anything else, with their natural development as children and as youths, and how we try and ensure that what the work that we do, the development work that we do, isn't abusive. So I found it a really useful course. Molly's done it as well, and I think you, fair to say, you find much the same. It was useful, thought-provoking, helped shape your practice in positive ways. So we thought, rather than try and replicate that ourselves, the easiest thing to do would just be to invest the money in making that training available to everyone. So we're going to do that hopefully within the next month or so. We'll have all that training available for people, and you'll be able to do it in your own time rather than try and, because we could have booked it where everybody turns up at Firhill and sits in a room and we get a trainer in to do it. They do that option as well. But it felt particularly at the moment, it was probably more appropriate just to give people the opportunity to do it online. And we might follow it up with a session that we do in person, where we can just get together and chat about our reflections on the course and sort of share any learning that we had. I think that would probably be quite useful. So that's it. Sorry, long answer for what was probably going to be a short question.
No problem. Thank you.
There's a thing on, is it Thursday? And it's the town head, your town head. Is it Thursday? Molly, I'm looking at you.
I couldn't get access to that through the links.
The 18th, whenever that is.
It's on Facebook, Sean, and they've got like 3 or 4 different workshops throughout the day.
Okay.
Seen that?
What one are you going to, Molly?
I haven't signed up to them yet. I was going to go to as many of them as I could.
Yeah. Because this Thursday we've got a photo voice meeting thing with Joey, don't we?
12:30, yeah.
12:30. And then just go to one after that. And we don't have the young people on Thursday night, so. Okay.
So the only thing I'll just add quickly to since we're talking about training generally, me more than Neil, but me and Neil will make sure that we get this online available. All the training that we've done so far is available online, and we will include, as part of that kind of pack of training activities, I guess, we'll include some multiple choice or whatever, some kind of questions at the end of each that you can complete to kind of cement your learning, I suppose. So for anybody who's missed any of these sessions, we will attempt to get these online for you by the end of the week. But if you've missed a session, please can you do that online work before the Easter holidays? So that we have everybody up to scratch when we start the Easter holiday program and the work that we're doing there. Just to say that.
Yep.
Cool. Are we going to do prizes for the multiple choice tests?
I feel like that would be unfair on the people that showed up. Who don't do a multiple choice test and get a prize.
But then the people who showed up could go and do the multiple choice questions anyway, and
but who can do it the fastest?
Well, if you want a prize, do the multiple choice question. If you don't want a prize, do the multiple choice questions.
Well, we're trying to reward
not
positive
really
behaviour here, Molly.
That's it. Do you know, my sister's friend enjoys going to the dentist because of that same thing, because she really looks after her teeth and she loves going to the dentist for the dentist to tell her how great her teeth are. She loves flossing, she loves like getting all different toothbrushes, different toothpaste. And I just thought, wow, I mean, that's a really good thing to be so excited about. And she'd be like, oh, I'm going to the dentist on Wednesday. I can't wait for her to say how good I've been doing. And you're just like, I mean, if you can do it with the dentist, you can do it with anything, really.
Absolutely.